The Planners is a poem about progress and urbanisation, and why this may not necessarily be a positive thing. In fact, the tone of the poem is quite suspicious or sceptical about modernisation and the potential costs associated with it. Note that the poet Boey Kim Cheng was born in Singapore in the year of its independence from Britain, 1965, but in 1997 he moved to Australia and took citizenship there. I'll read the poem. They plan, they build. All spaces are gridded, filled with permutations of possibilities. The buildings are in alignment with the roads, which meet at desired points, linked by bridges, all hang in the grace of mathematics. They build and will not stop. Even the sea draws back and the skies surrender. They erase the flaws, the blemishes of the past, knock off useless blocks with dental dexterity. All gaps are plugged with gleaming gold. The country wears perfect rows of shining teeth. Anesthesia, amnesia, hypnosis. They have the means. They have it all, so it will not hurt. So history is new again. The piling will not stop. The drilling goes right through the fossils of the last century. But my heart would not bleed poetry, not a single drop to stain the blueprint of our past tomorrow. Firstly, let's look at the title. And if you've already studied Atwood's The City Planners, you may be visualising similar sorts of people who are involved with the planning and construction of a place, in this case Singapore. And I'll tell you why I think that the setting is Singapore later. We've got this third person plural, they, and that refers to the planners. We start the stanza with two sharp, simple sentences. They plan, they build. These are declarative sentences, and they present progress as simple, inevitable, not up for discussion. The syntactic parallelism presents progress as logical, and is a very basic explanation of what happens in a city as it develops. We see an aphora, when they build, is repeated a little later in the stanza, this time in the compound sentence, they build and will not stop. And will not stop is repeated again at the end of the second stanza. The piling, a construction term, will not stop. This sort of repetition at the end of a sentence is known as epistrophe and also reinforces the idea of the inexorable, relentless expansion of Singapore. And I'll have that term written down on the next slide. Returning to the first stanza, the idea of cities being gridded makes me think of grid-planned cities such as Boston or central Glasgow. When cities are gridded, they're logically set out so that the population can access the amenities that they need. However, it also makes me visualise grid paper in a maths book, and if you circle all the words associated with maths in the stanza, you will start to notice the semantic field of mathematics. Gridded, permutations, which refers to the various ways that numbers can be set out, alignment, points, the word mathematics itself. Now, these words could be used to describe positivity and order, the way that everything fits together in a city, the roads running into the bridges. In fact, it's described as the grace of mathematics. The noun grace suggests beauty and ease, and maybe even has religious connotations, as in God's grace, suggesting that the city environment is an extraordinary creation. However, it could also indicate that man plays God in the city, controlling human behaviour and controlling or ruining nature. There are some sounds and keywords which are quite negative in the first stanza. The plosive alliteration in permutations of possibilities perhaps creates a sense of irritation or annoyance. It's quite blunt. And the sibilants towards the end of the stanza, the sea draws back, skies surrender, combined with the semantic field of war, notice those words associated with retreat and surrender, creates a more negative tone. Nature, the sea and the sky, is being attacked. Singapore does indeed have a history of land reclamation. Its first minor land reclamation project was in 1822, but since independence from Britain in 1965, its land mass has expanded by about 25%, and this has been achieved by pushing back the sea and infilling. So the tides and the horizon have literally retreated to allow for expansion, such as the dramatic Marina Bay Sands development. Singapore has grown into a metropolis and an important financial hub, and we can see that all the maths references hint at this. In the second stanza, the words that stand out most for me are dental dexterity. This alliterative phrase makes me imagine a dentist poking around at deftly fixing someone's teeth. If you look closely at this stanza, you'll notice numerous words associated with dentistry. Circle them. The building in Singapore is being compared to cosmetic dentistry. We see this in erase the flaws. Everyone wants a flawless smile nowadays. And gaps being plugged with gleaming gold. Notice the harsh G alliteration here. It's a guttural sound, which rather takes the shine off of this image and makes me think of fillings. Much of the extended metaphor of dentistry alludes to the pain and fear associated with the visit to the dentist, but there's the idea of striving for perfection too. So the building in Singapore is being compared to cosmetic dentistry, implying that Singapore is being made more beautiful, more pristine. But there's this undercurrent of fear that's also associated with this metaphor. And it's firmly established by the tricolon of anesthesia, amnesia, hypnosis. These are all medical words associated with numbness or forgetting, and they could imply that we're lulled into a false sense of security by this perfect, shiny city. The anaphora in "they have the means, they have it all" is interesting as it refers to the increased wealth that Singapore has experienced in recent decades. But if we look at the end of the line, "they have it all, so it will not hurt," we return to this idea of numbing pain. And indeed, this is something that a dentist might say to reassure a patient. We have another word associated with both building and dentistry at the end of the stanza, drilling. Ouch. So in this stanza there are two elements juxtaposed, fear and beauty, which creates quite an unsettling atmosphere. The idea of history being new again is also rather disturbing or dystopian. It's as if the shiny newness of Singapore somehow overshadows, negates, or rewrites the past. If you've read any of the great dystopian novels, such as Orwell's 1984, you will have seen that the state or the dictator often tries to rewrite history to reflect glory on themselves and disorientate the population. So this phrase seems quite sinister. Furthermore, the image of fossils being drilled through and shattered also creates a sense of disapproval or skepticism. In this poem, there's a sense that history and culture have been devalued and modern has been accepted as better. It raises an interesting point. Do we narrow our experience of life by eroding our cultural heritage and our past? Can we lose our cultural identity and creativity in the name of progress? Should we forget where we've come from, even if the past is problematic? Surely it's important to remember history and learn from it, rather than wipe it out by building over it. So the tension between past and present, or past and future, is illustrated by the constant use of juxtaposition and oxymoron in this poem. In the final stanza, there's a shift from the third to first person, and the tone becomes much more personal and emotive. The poetic voice tells us that he could not express what he felt in the city, and he could not be creative in a sterile, manicured environment. If we look closely at the phrase, "my heart would not bleed," there are various possible interpretations. In the developed world, we tend to use the idiomatic phrase, "my heart bleeds," in an ironic way. I got out of my Ferrari, stepped in a puddle, and ruined my Jimmy Choos. Oh, my heart bleeds for you. It's become a statement of indifference towards the overprivileged, and this perhaps links with the idea that Singapore has become a wealthy place. But I think it's more helpful to think of the image of a bleeding heart as a genuine expression of sorrow, as it was originally meant. So a sense of sadness is evoked by the bleeding heart image, but the negative "would not bleed" implies that his lifeblood, his passion, poetry, would not come. The narrator was unable to be creative in the sterile environment of Singapore. The caesura after the word poetry serves to emphasize this severing of creativity. There's definitely a sense of sadness in the final stanza that this place, Singapore, which has forgotten the struggles and influences of its past, has become a first world, capitalist sort of place, not a place for the creative, no place for a poet. The blood image is extended with the noun drop, creating the sense that the poetic voice cannot influence, counteract, or mark the place with his poetry. Not in any way. He cannot stain the blueprint. Blueprint is another technical term to do with construction. It's a design or technical drawing, and it's as if Singapore's future is all planned out. It's set on a path of modernisation, and there's nothing the poetic voice can do about it. You will probably have noticed that this poem is written in free verse, with many examples of enjambment. This counteracts the sense of order hinted at by the mass imagery and the use of caesura, and it creates a sense of freedom and creativity, something that the poetic voice clearly values and craves and feels is threatened. There are several key themes in this poem, such as man versus nature, and also the themes of history versus modernisation, old versus new, and I'm sure you could think of many others. Thank you very much for listening, and do please take a moment to give this video a thumbs up.